Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. Today is Monday, the 13th day of February 2023. And what I'm going to be doing today is reading from a particular book here. The book is by William Norman Greer, and it's America's Engineered Decline. It's not by accident this country has completely come apart. And I will be reading sections of this particular book to make you aware of that as this country continues to go its downward slide. The last 30 to 40 years, actually, been probably at least close to 40 years. A lot of it took place under the Clinton administration, but there were others, such as George Sr. was involved in it, and naturally, even Ronald Reagan was involved in it. It seems as though once the United States had no quote unquote enemy to deal with, that is, the Soviet Union fell, it seems as that was the key that brought the change in our policies. And in many ways, the United States has been what I would call a rogue state that actually is attacking other countries. Although they made excuses in the past, it was because of communism and the Soviets. But in reality, simply, we've been doing that for a long, long time. So let's get into the meat of the book here. Chapter 1, which the chapter is simply called Race to the Bottom. And in the introduction first, we're going to go with this. It says that there are people in the Bush administration and in Mexico and in Congress who believe that we should do away with borders entirely. Their ultimate goal is to create the hemisphere of a free trade area consolidating all of North and South America into some kind of United States of the Americas. This is a legitimate political issue and it should be discussed and debated openly, that is, with Americans, the public at large, as much as some of our policymakers are letting this take place without a frank discussion. They planned it that way. They don't want you to plan it that way. We are undergoing a radical change in our national character and social structure, and it shouldn't be allowed to happen without at very least the informed consent of the public. I'm among those who believe that it shouldn't be allowed to happen, period. And I believe that this remains a majority view, which is probably why it's being done by stealth and misdirection. This was the Representative Tom Tanacrio, from Republican from Colorado. Um, that was his statement. Proponents of full hemispheric integration, economic and political, have targeted 2005 for the culmination of a sneak attack on the independence of America. Using the misleading bait of promoting prosperity, the powerful globalist supporting this scheme hopes to entice our nation to a revolutionary trap. The cleverly misnamed Free Trade Areas of the America, FTAA, designed as an open-ended political process. The FTA was steadily harmonizing America down to the level of the least fortunate in this hemisphere. Yet few Americans have been any awareness of where the free trade area of the Americas is intended to take us. And the architects of this revolution have no intentions of advertising their aims. Accordingly, the publication of American Engineer Declines comes at a very welcome event. Most Americans old enough to discern trends have become nervous about our nation's future. They recognize that our nation is plagued by problems with serious long-term consequences. Out of control immigration and manufacturing flight are but two of those problems examined in American Engineering Decline. Unfortunately, the public doesn't know what to do about its concerns and generally looks to the government for solutions. But despite much posturing by politicians, problems continue to get worse. Okay, so for example, since 9/11, the public has made it particularly clear that it wants government to enforce control of our borders and stem massive immigration. Yet, instead, we now hear of proposals for amnesty and further openings of our border. Why? Because as William Norman Grigg shows, our government has been marching to a far different drummer than public opinion. As American Engineer Decline demonstrates, the public wishes are constantly frustrated because the public doesn't understand this competition for control of our own government. Most of us are busy with our personal affairs and accordingly not well informed about what our government is actually doing. We are prone to accept excuses and assurances from political leaders while the more diligent and better informed competitors or competition gets the results. American engineer decline will help America correct that deficiency, they state. It will help them understand the forces and agendas responsible for our nation's decline. But most importantly, Mr. Greer offers help in understanding, and we hope blocking one of the most dangerous milestones of that decline, the free trade area of the Americas. There's no such thing as free trade. It's always about someone who benefits, you see. And at one time, it benefited the people here in this country. We can go all the way back to over 120 years ago. That what was mainly the tax that actually kept government going was, repeat, was import tax levies. That were import taxes with importers who would bring certain things in our country. And we would protect our own industry at that time. This is called laissez-faire economy. What's happened since then is basically we no longer have a import tax duties on anything hardly more, unless someone actually goes to Congress and begs them to protect a certain industry. Most of it is no longer. This was under the Woodrow Wilson's administration that did this. Part of the globalization, even 120 years ago. It was to destroy our own nation to compete. And so the government itself, instead of actually solving that problem, they passed on the taxes that was supposed to be from import taxes to the American people. That's right. They put it onto the American people's shoulders to pay the taxes in order to keep the federal government going. You follow me? So let's continue on. The accelerated economy devastation and loss of political control promises by our entry into FTAA agreement would make it very difficult for Americans to reverse course later when they more clearly see the destination. If you love America and want to pass on a legacy of freedom and opportunity to future generations, please read on. Then get others to do so as well. Most especially, we urge every reader to get involved in the inter-organization drive to activate Congress to stop the FTAA. Defeating the FTAA would deliver a huge setback to globalists seeking to fasten stifling socialism on the peoples of the world. Similarly, stopping the FTA would have struck a big blow in the longer struggle to restore a constitutional government at home and promote freedom, a real basis for prosperity throughout the world. Blocking the FTAA is certainly a big challenge, but organized organizations could well carry the day. Let's remember that the majorities don't change the course of history. Determined minorities do. Determined minorities can still mobilize the power of public opinion using the freedoms our founding fathers attempted to secure for us. So here's chapter 1, Race to the Bottom. The elite hated the middle class, which challenges them in the name of God-given liberty. And little wonder that this hatred grew deeper as the middle class became stronger and imposed restrictions through which all the people, including the most humble, had the right to rule their own lives and keep their greater part of what they earned for themselves. Clearly, if the elite were to rule again, the middle class had to be destroyed, for you see, the elite of all nations, then as now, were not divided. They were one international class and worked together and protected each other. But the middle class laughed and said, "We will bind you with the chains of our Constitution, which we must obey also, lest we depose you. For we are now powerful and we are human beings, and we wish to be free from your old despotism." That's a quote from Taylor Caldwell. What does it do when you take away all those jobs from people who support families who raise families? Manufacturing has been the strength of this country. If we can't make anything here anymore, what does that do? The fabric of the society is falling apart. This is Jim Grayhouse, 55-year-old, a 30-year employee of the Hoover Vacuum Factory in Canton, Ohio, after he loses his job. That's June 2003. We are basically liquidating a whole middle class, polarizing people on the two extremes, the haves and have-nots. We are becoming a third world country. By the way, this is a quote from a plant manager at one time here where I worked at, here in Aiken, a company called Regal Textile. And his name is Roger Chastain. He's the president of Mount Vernon Mills. Well, the sad part simply is that company is gone. That company, which was located in Greenville, South Carolina, is no longer in existence. What they made was what we call a niche item. They made what we call baby clothes and also baby wear for not only for the babies, but they also made it for the cribs, the small pillowcases, all those things were what I call a niche that this company made. And that's, as far as I know, is gone. I've gone locally up to certain areas where plants used to be at, and those plants are closed. You see, this was where people could make some kind of money to, live their lives. Next quote. It makes me wonder if there's some merit to the conspiracy theory, the idea that all this is part of a deliberate scheme to wipe out the middle class. The middle class is always a pain in the neck where government is concerned. It's where you find most of the people who complain about taxes, regulations, and other policies. If you wipe them out, you just have the ultra rich and the poor, and a perfect arrangement for a dictatorship. This is Jerry Skoff, Skoff, owner of Badger Tech Metals in Mimimi, Wisconsin. So I assume he's if I understand that company, it would be probably dealing with what I would call either some type of fabrication or machining works. We were the middle class, lamented the former textile worker Jimmy Bennett before hastily correcting himself. We still are. Jimmy and his wife, Erlene, residents of Kannapolis, North Carolina, were among the nearly 6,500 employees of the Pilatex towel factory who were laid off in early August of 2003. This is 20 years ago, folks. That plant is not even existent. It's been completely. I used to live in that area. I didn't live in Kannapolis. I lived in a place called Mooresville. Mooresville was probably about 10 to 15 miles away from it. That plant was not called at that point when I was there. It wasn't called Pilatex. It was called Cannon, Kannon towels. They made bath towels. They probably made other things, but that was what they were known for. And they've been in business for a long time. This plant employed 6,500 people, folks. That factory was a Bohemian when I remember as a boy, a huge plant in one brick building. And it's gone. It's been destroyed. It's been already paved over. Everything's done away with it. They destroyed it. They didn't want people to know in the future that there used to be a plant there that employed 6,500 people. And I called on customers as a salesman for my own company here in Aiken. And I called on this company, not on them, but actually called on companies that were actually had done business with them, which were machine shops, you see. Just 2 years earlier, the Bennetts had bought a modest four-bedroom range house, after putting in a corner combined 43 years of the mill. Working part-time jobs and frugally managing their money, we have made it, Jimmy told the Washington Post reporter, but their thrift and industry weren't enough to save their jobs at Pilatex. Like much of American textile industry, was deluged by a flood of cheap imports from China. Yeah, this all took place with what we call the most favored nations policy. The United States did that under the Bill Clinton administration, and along with Republicans, by the way. It's not just the Democrats, folks. Okay, so when they did this allowed them to have a free reign here in America and also in Europe. And it was called the most favored nation, and it was a part of what we call the West was protecting itself for a long time, and then they allowed China in, which was basically self-suicide. You see. Now the Bennetts and thousands of Pilatex employees found themselves in an economic freefall, shedding many of the middle-class amenities to which they had become accustomed. Many were left fending off foreclosures, evictions, notices, or car repossessions. Luxuries such as cable television and cell phones were jettisoned and soon necessarily were in jeopardy as well. Within weeks of layoff, more than 200 former employees had their water turned off. Kannapolis means city of looms. That's what it meant. And the town's textile mills offered steady employment to several generations. Many, if not most, of those who toiled in the mills had a high school education, supplemented with an admirable work ethic. When the looms fell silent, many of these workers were cresting middle age with families to support and mortgages to pay. Some, like the Bennetts, quickly took any available jobs, even those of nearly minimum age and minimum wage, Others tried to find other textile jobs or simply work in the manufacturing sector, but their prospects were less than encouraging, given the accelerating flight of manufacturing work abroad, particularly to China. According to Charles Brenner, the American Textile Manufacturers Institute, as textiles from Communist China and Vietnam flood the American market, people are moving jobs faster than you can count. In 2008, all import quotas on Chinese textiles will be removed. They were supposed to keep them protected, but they didn't protect them. This is a sellout. This is a fucking politicians who sell out your own country, folks, because they've got investments there, you see, not here. They don't give a damn. These are your true enemies, folks. These are. They really are your true enemies that have destroyed this country. And they fucking need to go back to hell where they belong. You don't like what I say, I'm sorry. But I've seen what I lived in the good times in the 60s and 70s, and I watched these assholes destroy everything. And they still live quite good, you see. And they're still in politics, folks, guarantee you. It doesn't matter what political party they are. They're just stinking liars. They don't care. They feel like they're better than everybody else, but they're not. At that point, predicts Bremer, the Chinese will completely dominate the market. Ironically, at least some of the future textile imports from China will probably be produced on looms from Pilatech's Kannapolis facility. But those looms will be in China, you see, operated by Chinese workers, as thousands of the company's workers have scrambled to find new jobs or to keep creditors at bay. Brokers and investors have scrambled to carve up the company's remaining assets. The company looms and other heavy machinery will likely go to, guess where? Go to China or Pakistan or India. The machinery will go there. Manufacturing decline. The Kannapolis tragedy is merely a small snapshot of the general decline of American manufacturing economy. While hundreds of factories close in any given year, observed the Wall Street Journal, something historically and fundamentally different is occurring now. For manufacturing, this isn't a cynical downturn. Most of these basic and low-skill factory jobs aren't liable to come back when the economy recovers or when the excess capacity around the world dissolves. The task of making these manufactured goods is increasingly being assumed by more efficient machines and processes. Well, what's occurring here is what he just said here. They ship these looms to foreign countries so that they could use them and get that technology, probably in Vietnam, probably even other countries, or even probably, Bangladesh, whatever, which a lot of stuff comes from them now. And those plants got those looms. They built buildings, and they were probably also American companies that invested in this also, folks, you see. You see, this country has over 300 million people. Back in the 60s, back in 1960, look at the records and look at how many people used to live here. There were around almost maybe 200 million people lived here in America. The social fabric of this country has completely changed dramatically. It's no longer what it used to be. There were two or three different groups that worked. Now we have many, many people come in our country who have no idea what the Western life is all about, and they bring their customs in here, and they amalgamate what I would call their perspective. And we're still seeing it. We're seeing it with Biden today doing the same crap that almost all, no matter who you vote for, are doing the same shit, you see. They don't give a damn, you see. Don't ever fucking believe these people. And the best thing you do, stop fucking voting. By some estimates, nearly 1.3 million manufacturing jobs have been moved abroad since the beginning of 1992. The bulk in the past 3 years, 2000 2003, to Mexico and East Asia. In a Labor Day speech in 2003 before union workers in Ohio, a state that shed 160,000 manufactured jobs between 2000 and 2003, President George W. Bush, bozo himself, tried to play up the notion that the job losses reflect increases in productivity, corporate greed, and corruption, and September 11th terrorist attack. Baloney. What productivity means is that we've got a lot of hard work and we're using new technology to make people more effective when it comes to the job. And that's important, according to President Bush. You see, in 1979, it took more than 40 hours of labor to make a car. Now it takes 18 hours. We're productive. Our workers are really productive in America. Then they lose their jobs because they're productive. It's an oxymoron statement. It's certainly true that advances in technology have dramatically improved American productivity, but the perspective offered by President Bush perversely blames the most productive works in the entire world for the dismal prospects that await them as manufacturing jobs evaporate. Furthermore, there is sound reason to believe that our nation's performance on the productivity front reflects not a healthy, streamlined economy, but the Federal Reserve's success in redefining productivity for political reasons. The supposed rise in productivity was a silver lining in the economy clouded the last 3 years, wrote New York Post economist analyst John Prudell in late 2003. Fed chief, that is Alan Greenspan, has spoken proudly of it, saying the United States was becoming a more efficient producer of goods. But a slip of the tongue may call the whole productivity miracle into question. The wayward tongue in question belongs to Senator Robert Bennett, a Republican from Utah, chairman of the Joint Economics Committee. In a television interview, Bennett, apparently unaware of the implications of his comment, offered a off-the-cuff description of the Federal Reserve Soviet-style redefinition of productivity in the mid-1990s. If you go back into the 90s, Alan Greenspan examination where the economy was, the productivity numbers that he was getting through traditional means, all indicated productivity was down. And Greenspan gathered the economists and the Fed together and said, this cannot be right. They said, we're doing it the way we've always done it, so the numbers have to be right. And Greenspan challenged them and said, if you look at the other data that made it very clear that productivity has got to be going on. They went back and recalculated and discovered that their productivity numbers had been wrong for months, if not years. Here's how the process works, folks, according to Crudell. The Fed chairman doesn't like an economic statistic, so he tells some lowly economists to take a mulligan and do the calculations over. Amazingly, they discovered exactly what the Feds want them to discover, the political important productivity miracle. Thus, it's clear that productivity hasn't caused a dramatic reduction in the numbers of jobs in America, reducing. Outsourcing has, sending work abroad to be done more cheaply by foreign workers in a more likable culprit. During the summer of 2003, 10 plants operated by the Hooker Furniture Corporation were shuttered, leaving hundreds of people from several states unemployed. This was not an austerity measure, since the company's profits had actually increased during the recent years, largely because it has started to outsource its work to cheaper foreign manufacturers. Every time we asked them to step up, they've done it. Commented CEO Hooker President Paul Toms of the employees who lost their jobs. I feel like we've let these folks down. What do you mean you feel like it? You have. And I don't know what I'll do different. It's unlike anything I've seen in my 21 years in the industry. A lot of plants have closed. People have been sent home and really have come quickly than anybody else expected. I think it's hard to say 3, 4, 5 years from now what the industry will look like domestically. As with the American textile industry, the U.S. furniture industry has been decimated again. An uneven competition with low-wage nations like Communist China. The Chinese have millions of people that they're trying to have employed, so hard to fault them. That is Tom's opinion. But I think that at some point this country has to think about what's best for us. You have industries and examples of predatory pricing. That's the risk we run, not just in furniture, but in any industry that we're letting leave this country. According to Andrew Broad, an economic analysis in Kernersville, North Carolina, where Hookers closed a plant for former employees hundreds, many American companies, rather than making capital investments in the U.S., have decided to funnel investments abroad, many to China itself. Some have contracted with Chinese producers, but others have entered in joint ventures to establish new factories and refurbish existing factories preserved. The closing of the Kernersville, this is near Greensboro, Kernersville Hooker plant had immediate local economic impact. If I don't work, I can't go out and spend money to shop or buy what I need. So that's going to put somebody else in jeopardy, former Hooker employee Mildred Stiles pointed out. Rather than being that trickle-down thing, you should continue, I think it's going to be more of a pour-down. I think it's going to hurt everybody concerned. Now, this is in 2003, folks. This is 20 years ago. We don't make anything here in this country anymore. How can you be independent economically? You can't be independently politically. I'll say that again. If you're not economically free, in other words, making good jobs, you do not have a base. You do not have a uh, foundation in order to have a legitimate good government also. That's key. Economics always comes before politics, folks. It's not the other way around. And what I mean by that simply is that means that your political power simply is that they become what I would call more forceful upon their own citizens. But yet it wasn't their citizens that fucked up. It was these people who did it. In some economic circles, the phenomenon she describes is called the race to the bottom, the sudden precipitous decline of an entire population from the middle class to the near subsistence living. Our nation's manufacturing sector has been the gateway to the middle class for untold millions of Americans, resulting in unprecedented national prosperity. What will America look like if manufacturing jobs continue to be outsourced to low-wage foreign competitors? Surveying Kernsville grim economy prospects, Broad declares, in part, the answer to that question is, what sort of America do you see now is here already? Next section, deindustrialization of the United States. This is done by on purpose, folks. It's not by happenstance, okay? Let's get that in your head. We're killing ourselves, layman Jerry Straub, owner of the Wisconsin manufacturing firm and member of the Save Our American Manufacturing. Bombs are falling, but people aren't paying attention. We've been reduced from a manufacturing and high-tech economy into a service economy. Yes, I remember those years when I was in college and they were pushing this nonsense. Oh, yeah, service jobs. That's going to be where it's at. Yeah, sure. You got to, that's really, well, the problem with service jobs, you got to have a manufacturing sector that can actually employ them. If you don't, you're not going to have those fucking service jobs neither. And they're not going to pay much, you see. This was what they told you, these nitwits in college, these professors that espouse this shit. And if things continue the way they are, the service sector will eventually go in the same direction. Of course it will. As noted as the previous cited Wall Street Journal story, once manufacturing jobs are outsourced to low-wage countries, that they almost certainly won't be coming back. Furthermore, the process of exporting industrial jobs necessarily entails deindustrializing the U.S. This cycle can become self-sustaining. Once tooling capacity is lost, that's correct, manufacturing simply has to move, observes John C. McCoy, owner of Omnitech Technical Associations in Washington State. People running companies in this country generally don't want to go offshore, but once the process got started, it snowballed because the specialized tooling capacity started to shut down. It takes a long time to retool, too long to remain competitive in this globalization economy. But yet you have to understand this technology was given to the Chinese back in the 70s under a crook or a traitor named Henry Kissinger, folks. This is where it all started. China was a fucking backward country. It was a third world country. And it's been basically the United States and Europe has actually saved its butt, you see, because their jobs went there. How many car companies are left here in the United States? How many car companies are left in Europe? Where are most of the car companies made in the fucking world, folks? I think there's over 100 companies that make cars in China. Now, these people that work there are working at slave labor pace. That's what they're working at, folks. They don't have any better situation there neither. And the United States loses its manufacturing capacity, continue McCoy. China is being set up as the center of global manufacturing. They have a huge supply of cheap labor, cheap power, very modern productive facilities. Of course, a brand new facility has been built. Many, perhaps even most of the Chinese-made products being unloaded on our docks and reaching our store shelves are assembled in automated plants and dropped into shipping boxes, whatever being touched by even a human hand. Many of those, and this is what they were claiming is going to be utopia for the West, and it's not. It's a dystopia. Many of these ultra-modern Chinese plants have been built by Japanese firms, but others have been built in recent years by U.S.-based multinational corporations. China's stated control economy rests on a foundation of low wages and outright slave labor. That's correct. This offers radical advancement to the Chinese firms in their competition with U.S. manufacturers. Well, if you don't have a protection, quote unquote, guess what, folks? If you don't have any protection, you don't have a import tax on this thing. How the hell are you supposed to protect U.S. manufacturers? There's no way. It's a fucking lie. All this shit is fucking lies. Your own government fucked you. It also provides the regime with a gusher of revenue it can use to subsidize key industries, in some instances, destroying American competition. Jay Benter, owner of Falcon Plastics in Brookington, South Dakota, has described how a key customer, a manufacturer of fishing lures, moved its production base from the U.S. to China. Prior to making the move, the customer asked Bender to make a bid on molds, which is what they use to make the lures. They have molds, they develop them. It's all that in manufacturing. It's all with molds, you see, because they produce things and makes it productive. It makes production out of it. Bender's bid was $25,000 per mold. The Chinese counteroffer was $3,000 a piece. I can't even buy raw materials for that, Bender protest. There are two possibilities. Either they are subsidized by the government or they gave away the molds to get the manufacturing business. In order to remain in business, Bender had to lay off nearly 1/3 of his workforce. There's also a severe price to be paid for relocating manufacturing to China. However, every firm that sets up for production in China has to turn over its technology. You give the technology that people work for here for 70 to 80 years, over 100 years, and you give it to them. That's why I run into a guy that worked for General Electric many years ago. And he told me General Electric gave them the technology for all their huge turbines that are used for dams. They gave them the fucking technology. They didn't even charge them for it. They gave it away because they want to destroy this country, folks, and that's what they've done. It wasn't the people who invent some of this stuff. No, they didn't get a piece of the pie and talk and say, wait a minute, what are you doing here? Intellectual property theft by the Chinese is very common, and any investment banker familiar with the Chinese system will tell people preparing to set up over there that they should pad their expenses by at least 40% to allow for graft, that is bribes, and other payoffs involving doing business over there. Nonetheless, U.S. firms continue to outsource their manufacturing to China. Well, most of these are large multinational companies, folks. The United States was set up at one time to do that, and then we kind of got it to a spoil, you see. The Multi-Institutional Academy study compiled in 2001 reported, in the months since the enactment of permanent normal trade relations, that is PNTR, legislation with China, there has been an escalation of production shifts out of the U.S. into China. That's part of the most favored nation policy, folks. This is all under George Bush, you see. W. Get it? Between October 1st to 2000 to April 30, 2000, more than 80 corporations announced their intention to shift production to China. According to the study, as many as 760,000 U.S. jobs have been lost due to U.S.-China trade deficit since 1992. A comparably number of jobs disappearing as a result of outsourcing also to Mexico. The employment effects of these production shifts goes well beyond the individual workers whose jobs were lost. Continues to report. Each time another company shuts down operations and moves works to China or Mexico or any other country, it has a ripple effect on the wages of every other worker in that industry. In other words, accelerating the race to the bottom. I was in this business, folks. I worked in it for over 20 years of my life. I didn't make anything. We sold the tooling to these corporations, these plants, textile plants, manufacturing plants. And we saw the handwriting on the wall in the early 2001. We saw that. And things began to change pretty quickly, ugly. And there were other companies here willing to give things away in order to survive. And we didn't do that. So we closed shop. We used to make a ton of great tooling stuff here in the United States. Good stuff, quality stuff, machine well, it was well done. All that went to China. That was given to them, folks. They didn't have to start off on a blank slate. They were given all this. It's not even fair to see this all was developed earlier in our own deal. Anyway, let's continue. Strategic vulnerability. Building Beijing's industrial capacity at U.S. expense oblivious poses other serious problems, not the least of which is the strategic threat to the United States posed by the Communist Behemoth. The case of Magna Quench, a electronics firm in Valparaiso, Indiana, illustrates the interconnected economy and strategic aspects of outsourcing to China. In 1995, Magna Quench was bought by a business consortium including China's interests. A few years later, the consortium announced its intention to relocate the plant to China. A move that would deprive the small community of 225 well-paying manufacturing jobs. Just as important, it would provide Beijing with key military technology. You see, Magna Quench makes 80% of the rare earth magnets used in America's smart bomb technology. As the Magna Quench example illustrates, the erosion of the U.S. industrial base has enormous national security implications, observed National Defense Magazine. It has made the United States so dependent on foreign countries for critical components and systems that it may have lost its ability to control its supply chains. And it has, folks. It has. You know that most of the United States armor, that is, key things, are now dependent upon Taiwanese or Chinese companies, no longer manufactured here in order to protect our country, supposedly. So what's happening is the United States is becoming dependent upon other countries such as China, India, Russia, France, and Germany for critical weapon technology. Do you understand the statement I just said? What it means simply is these assholes up in Washington who want to start a war with Russia, with the whole issue with Ukraine, there is no fucking way we could win a war with Russia, folks. Do you understand that? Do you understand this? We don't make our own fucking products anymore. We're dependent on other countries. You think they're going to sell stuff to us? What planet are you on? But your congressmen lie to you every fucking day. That's all they know how to do. And yeah, I'm mad. I put this off for a long, long time. I should have shared this longer time ago. I didn't find the book till recently. It was in my library here. I knew I had it, but I just couldn't find it. So it is conceivable that one of these governments could tell its local suppliers not to sell critical components to the United States because they do not agree with U.S. foreign policy. Business analysis Barry Lynn points out that many of American premier corporations, including key defensive-related firms, now consider themselves to be virtual companies, depending on a complex and widely dispensed network of suppliers around the world. Dell Computers, for example, assembles its computers out of 4,500 parts manufactured in various Asian countries, including Communist China. Dell is an important defense contractor, maintaining its inventory sufficiently for the whole thing here with the freedom of trade, only 4 days production. In other words, its supply line for interrupted for more than 96 hours. Dallas, that is the Texas plant, was ceased production because they're dependent upon it, folks. This just-in-time shit. Oh, it's just we don't need to keep anything in the warehouses anymore. We just get it overseas and be here in 4 days. Simply put, the U.S. industrial base is being taken apart piece by piece and relocated to other nations, including trade analysis Pat Choey and Edward Miller. In the process, much of American industrial military production base is being sold to foreign industry interests, and more importantly, a significant portion of it is being physically relocated to other nations, including our most likely strategic rival, China. How did this country, folks, you got to ask yourself, how did this country come from nowhere in the 1970s and within 50 years is now the global power? Because someone sold us out. That's how it worked. For more than a century and a half, American manufacturing economy attracted hardworking people from around the world who were eager to become Americans. Manufacturing jobs not only enabled those new arrivals to get on the ladder to the middle class, but helped them to assimilate into our nation's civil culture. But as former Treasury Department official Paul Craig Roberts points out, the loss of high productive jobs takes away the ladders of upward mobility and wipes out human capital. As our manufacturing base is being stripped away, Americans may someday find it necessary to immigrate in order to find manufacturing jobs. Next section is called No Americans Need Apply. And a short step from outsourcing manufacturing jobs to China to outsourcing American workers there. And it's not just factory workers who may someday have to take such drastic steps to preserve their livelihoods. Americans in high-tech information age positions are seeing their jobs disappear as well. Daniel Sue, a graduate from Sacramento State University in 1995 with a degree in computer science, an avid computer geek from the earliest ages, soon entered the job market as the peak of the infotech boom. Fresh out of college, he got a position with a computer chip maker. His name is Intel. 2 years later, he snagged his dream job as a traveling consultant for Boston-based PricewaterhouseCoopers. In 1999, he went back to California to work for a dot-com startup, but the venture quickly folded. But this didn't discourage Sue. My skills were in demand. He eventually landed a position with Accenture, a East Coast investment firm. And then the outsourcing began. I was in a building with 500 people, recalls Soon. Then they started to offshore. 9 months later, we were down to 50 people. Desperate to find a stable job, Soon seemingly found out with Chevron Texaco, working on a project in San Ramon, California, hoping that his 6-month contract would grow into a full-time position. Soon noticed something disturbing. The project employed a large, growing number of foreign workers in the U.S. on H-1B and L-1 visas. Thank you. Thank you, you royal traitors in Washington. Rather than training American employees, Soon and his fellow consultants were training guest workers and offshore personnel. And through a slow and steady but subtle process of attrition, the Americans were being let go. And at the end of each 2-week pay period, a score or so American workers would receive their pink slips. It's all about fucking money, these people are, you see. In January 2003, Soon, halfway through his 6-month, $60,000 contract, was called into a meeting with 2 senior corporate personnel and sternly told that his performance was inadequate. I told them my program worked great. I trained everyone, and my full-time Chevron manager came back to me up. Soon back me up. Soon relates the room was silent for a minute, then they just came up with another excuse. Yeah, this is a lousy line. Like so many others in the tech field, engineers, programmers, software designers soon found that his job had been outsourced and that the company had used him to train his foreign investments. Yes, they did. The most tragic case of this sort involved Kevin Flanger, a programmer for Bank of America and former Chevron employee who shot himself to death in May 2003 after being forced to train his replacement employee from India. It's all about the fucking money, isn't it? Soon began looking for work, but he soon realized the job market had changed. Related to CIO magazine, no one he knew could find a job. Referred to a position in Texas, Soon arranged a telephone interview only to be hung up on after 15 seconds. His friends informed him that the company only interviews Americans to be in compliance with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. You see, your government sold you out, people. That's what they do. You see, they're wolves in sheep clothing. And that no Americans were ever hired again, you see. By taking piecework, that is usually for $10 an hour, Soon was able to pay his bills. He continued to make his daily rounds of employment agencies and showed up for job interviews, but he became convinced that interviews were profundant gestures made by companies bent on sending the work offshore. It was an excuse. Soon, that is, eventually decided to send his resume abroad in hopes of finding work in his field. It would be really interesting to work in Bangalore, India, he mused, but I was told, Daniel, it's against the law for you to work here. You can come here on vacation, but you can't work here. If spirits of mist sorts have become heartbreaking, common across the jing and breadth of American high-tech sector, William F. Jasper, senior editor for the New American magazine, described the Dickerson scene that unfolded in the Austin headquarters of Dell Computers just 2 weeks before Christmas of 2002. Hundreds of Dell employees gathered for a town hall meeting at the Austin campus, ill prepared for the message that Senior Vice President Jeff Clark was about to deliver. Meetings of this sort were unusually big on awards, recognition, and introductions of new products and product teams. And despite the market drubbing of tech stocks in general, Dell had posted another banner year in sales, growth, and profits. The company also benefited from a nice cash balance, Mr. Clark noted. Then came the bad news. The company was announcing new personnel attrition goals of 10% per year, about double the normal attrition rate. These positions would not be filled in the United States, Clark explained. They would be filled by new hires in India, China, and other countries where Dell is shifting its business. And yet they have the audacity to come back here and sell their products here. It's not just Dell, it's Apple, it's Macintosh, it's Windows, every one of them. That was our technology. That was what we made. We gave it away, you see. Audible grasp came from the employee audience at high-tech assemblies of Dell top software engineers, electrical engineers, test engineers, group managers, administrative talent. Continued Jasper's account. A Dell employee who attended the meeting told the New American, "I definitely Paul come over the crowd. It did not make for a happy Christmas." Now, see these guys, they do it at some time, they play games. These guys who are running these plants, CEOs, managers, whatever, don't give a damn. They'll do it on your Thanksgiving holidays. Last year they did that here in America. So many people, over 2,000 people got laid off the day before Thanksgiving. They don't care. They don't have any heart, you see. They get their job, and they're probably involved with that all the time, you see. They sold out their country. They sold out everybody. There have been portions of such developments at Dell since 2000 when Dell opened its China Design Center in Communist China. Shortly therefore began a steady trickle of red Chinese engineers, private planners, and managers brought to Dell Austin campus for training. And some U.S. Dell employees began making the trek to China for 4 to 6 months, staying to train Chinese personnel there. Yeah, I remember that. I remember a customer we had that did that also. He went over to China and basically told them how to do things and set up things. And then after that, that was it. The job was no longer, you see. All that technology was given to these clowns. Around the Dell headquarters, these people have smirk attitudes too, you see. And I know they're communist folks. They're not free. They never have been. That's a misnomer. Around the Dell headquarters in Austin, employees had begun vying, referring to the Chinese invasion as training our replacements. Few expected that the replacements would start so soon, though. Jobs that stayed put are becoming a lot harder to find these days, observed Time magazine in mid-2003. U.S. companies are expected to send 3.3 million jobs overseas to the next 12 years, primarily to India, according to a study by Forrester Research. If you ever call Dell about a sick PC or American Express about an error on your bill, you have already bumped the tip of this offshore outsourcing iceberg. The friendly voice that answers your question was probably a customer sales rep in Bangalore or New Delhi. These relations, low-skilled jobs were the first to go, starting in 1997. But more and more of the jobs that are moving abroad are highly skilled and highly paid, you see. The type that U.S. workers assume would always remain at home. No longer is just Disney toys and Nike shoes made in Haiti and Indonesia, added the Christian Science Monitor. Its software engineering, accounting, and productive development is being outsourced to India, Philippines, Russia, and China. As with the exodus of manufacturing jobs, the outsourcing that is IT, technology jobs, may have permanent consequences for our nation's economy and technical standards. Bashir Jundyal, presides over Intignoia Corporation, a firm that specializes in domestic outsourcing, points out that U.S. corporations who outsource their IT jobs are training the workforce of our future economy. In China's case, strategic competitors. What's going to be the incentive for our future generations to get a degree in electrical engineering? Asked Johnny. We have to ask if we're getting ready to give up our pioneer position in the world. The dream is dying. We need to ask some even more elementary questions. If Americans aren't making anything, how will they be able to make a living? Yeah, that's a good question, folks. These nitwits up there in Washington don't know what the shit they're doing, you see. These are the fucking problems, folks. You need to understand, you need to stop voting for these fucking clowns because they destroyed this country. They are the true traitors of this country, folks. It is possible to maintain a middle class standard of living in a service based economy. No, not going to happen here. Given that, as we examine in a later chapter, our nation is importing a third world population even as it outsources our job. This is all done on purpose, folks. Will there soon be any service economy jobs left for Americans to occupy? Although Americans are glutted on cheap consumer goods, their standard of living, measured in tangible wealth that can be transmitted to their heirs, has declined precipitously during the last 30 years. It was no problem for me when I was in graduate high school in the 70s, late 70s. I could find a job. Jobs were plentiful. And I was willing to work. But you know, they're not willing to employ people who are over 60 neither, you see. A short generation ago, the greatest country on the face of this earth realized an impossible dream. America put a man on the moon. I don't know about that. Wrote political analysis Lewis T. March and Brett Nelson. But not only was the American dream evident in outer space, right here at home, one American worker with a high school diploma could support a family. That's what it was about, folks. One worker, one American worker, that was the man who provided for his family. Not his wife having to work, you see. He worked. Anytime in American history before the 1970s, the average worker, farmer, salesman, anyone at that deal, it didn't matter, could support his family better and better with each ensuing generation. Nowadays, more people find supporting a family on one income is just about as difficult as going to the moon. Educated young people look longer and harder for jobs, continue March and Nelson. Veteran workers find no security in seniority or in their pension funds. Multinational corporations increasingly treat their employees like equipment with minimum maintenance, lower operating costs, built obsoletes, and cheap offshore replacements. Nowadays, when pink slips appear, retraining and counseling programs are the solution. And your state takes care of that too, folks, if you're not aware of that. They hand that ball to them. So the state, you actually taxpayers pay for this shit too. Not the company. Your own state pays for this, which is not the right way. But that's what the state of South Carolina does. You see, when BMW came here, when Volvo came here, and when Boeing aircraft came here in South Carolina, they all got that training from the taxpayers paying for this retraining or telling them how to build their jobs. That was part of it. Then they got a 10-year deal, quote unquote. They didn't have to pay any property tax, if not longer, on the buildings or whatever they built. It was a free benefit. So Volvo built a plant here. BMW's been here since 1985. And then Boeing moved one of their plants, I guess, from the west to the east here in order trying to save on money. But it was actually built near Charleston, South Carolina, right there off the coast of South Carolina, in a way of just getting it shipped off to foreign countries. And I'm sure that it's being now put together somewhere else too. It's a possibility. These fortunate enough to keep their jobs receive lower, adjusted for inflation pay, than the previous generation. This has been the trend since 1973. There's something dreadful wrong here. The debt monster looming behind this disheartening trend is a mountainous accumulation of household consumer debt. A generation ago, a typical American middle-class family lived on the income of a single breadwinner, noted a USA Today front page story. In recent years, it has taken two workers, that is the spouses, to live the middle-class dream. Now it seems even that is not enough to survive the skyrocketing costs of housing, health care, and colleges while saving for retirement and shouldering government debt loads. By the way, let's just get to the health care issue, folks. That issue was used to be a county hospital here in South Carolina. It was actually throughout the whole country. Mr. Nixon decided to give that away and created corporate hospital care. And it's been going up ever since. And the government comes in and bails these people out. Although most middle income families are hardened are burdened with credit card debt. The typical American family doesn't splurge on designer jeans or clothes, exotic travel, or gourmet food, or other extravagance. Instead, they are using credit cards to fill in a gap between their income and their costs, according to financial counselor Tamala Drong. It's more about maintaining their standard of living than frivolous consumptions. Well, basically, this was 20 years ago, folks. What is it now like? Inflation is rampant here in this country, and it's not going to stop because the Fed, a group of individual bankers, have nothing to do with the federal government, folks. Get that in your head. They destroyed this country. Not surprisingly, the combination of widespread consumer debt and contracting job markets has produced an unprecedented number of bankruptcies, according to the Consumer Bankruptcy Project at Harvard University. Approximately one-third of families who file for bankruptcy owe an entire year's salary on their credit card. And while credit card debt declined monetarily, that is, in 2001, this was achieved mainly by trading high-interest credit cards debt for low-rate home equity loans. But home refinancing, one of the defaulting filters of American consumer economy, compounds rather than solves the problem of household debt by putting homes at risk. As with credit card debt, home equity loans and second and third mortgages are being used by many households to make ends meet. In a study, the mortgage refinancing binge of the early 2000s, Dr. Rickenbacher examined the pattern of consumer spending from 2002 first quarter to 2003 first quarter. What we found greatly surprised us. Apart from a small and short-lived surge in motor vehicle sales, propelled to some extent by 0% 5-year financing offered, expenditures on consumer durables were flat over the year. Dr. Rickenbacher responded. Among non-durable goods, such as major increases in spending, were on food, gasoline, and fuel. 64% of the higher consumer spending was on services, and mainly on housing and medical care. This is to say that Americans, many supposedly members of the middle class, were plundering equity from their homes and assuming enlarged debt burdens to pay for necessities, not luxuries. It was discovered that shocked us because we learned that the American consumer heavy borrowing is the largest financial expenditures on essentials, summarized Rickenbacher. The national economy has been similarly dependent on this debt-driven surge in consumer spending. Today, extracting cash from homes has become a great and hidden slush fund supporting current levels of consumer spending and therefore the American economy generally. Notes by internationalist analyst named Robert Morrill. In baby boomer era, America burning the mortgage was a rite of passage to true financial independence. It symbolized the family's liberation from debt, but now the American home is just one more credit line to be tapped, continues Morrill. Moreover, at some point, we will exhaust the supply of money available using homes as collateral. According to Morrill, the U.S. debt bubble reflects the corrupting influences of government subsidies, value-free modern finances, and globalization. Federal intervention in mortgage markets encourage people to overextend by making borrowing cheaper than it otherwise would be. As always, when government subsidies something, we get too much. Yeah, they destroy everything. They wouldn't know how to fix a fence, folks. They don't. These are all lawyers. Lawyers lie. They make laws that make us slaves, folks, when the reality is just legalese, too. Legalese is not the law. If you want to pass something, do something, do it properly. And not by going through the Senate, but if you're going to pass a quote-unquote treaty, that treaty should be passed by 3/4 of the states of the Union, period. Not some flimsy 51-49 vote in the Senate. That's what they do. It's not really law, folks. Without foreign buyers of debt, both private and government, the wave of cash out refinancing home equity loans would reverse, and we will return to the normal mode of gradually paying down mortgages. But we won't do that, folks. You see, we won't do that. You can simply fix this back. But we're waiting too long here, and it's a different ball game now. It's completely different. In the last 3 years, things have changed massively in this country, big time. Eventually, the bubble will burst. It simply has to. Home buyers depend on their jobs to make their mortgage payments, and the economic contractions caused by a squeeze on consumer spending will put these jobs in jeopardy, as Morrill warns. And as we've seen, the jobs on which these homes depend on are being sent abroad. Thus, it's not surprising that as our nation manufacturing base has shrunk, mortgage delinquency and foreclosures have accumulated at an unprecedented rate. At the same time, the federal government is accumulating unprecedented debt themselves, a $600 billion annual deficit, and national debt approaching $7 trillion. Well, folks, it's over, what is it now? $32 trillion? That's what they say. Who knows what's true? What happens if, so to be perfect candidate, when foreign interest stops lending us money? That's where we're at, folks, right there. The global money market is a fickle lover, you see, concludes Morrow. Once money stops flowing into a debt bubble, the bubble bursts and no financial intervention can restore it. Just ask the Malaysians, just ask the Russians, just ask the Argentinians. Since our government owns the national debt in dollars, one likely scenario involves monetizing the debt. That is simply printing out worthless dollars to pay off the debt. That is what they're doing right now, folks. They've been doing it for the last 2 or 3 years, if not longer, which is tantamount to repudiating it. While destroying the purchasing power of American consumers, Christopher Wood of Credit Lyons Securities, Asia and Hong Kong foresees the impending inflationary collapse of the dollar. That was in 2003, folks. That was in 2003. This is 2023. The handwriting's all over the place, folks. Get your money out of the banks. I surely wouldn't have $10,000 in the bank, folks, anymore. I wouldn't. So long as America continues to secure easy funding, there is no pressure on policymakers in Washington to do anything other than run super easy policies to try to keep their own consumer credit cycles going. Wood wrote in 2003 overview of the global economy. The current trend can continue for a while, but the longer America assesses her finances, the more inevitable will be the ultimate collapse of the U.S. paper dollar standard. The view here is that the U.S. dollar will have disintegrated by the end of this decade. Folks, what Wood describes is what we call hyperinflation, the swiftest way to destroy the middle class. Hyperinflation in the 1920s wiped out the German middle class, clearing the field for the rise of National Socialism. A possible variation of that doomsday scenario Morrow suggests would be polarization of the American political system between those serving the interests of foreign creditors and those representing American mortgage holders. In brief, our current course will lead to abolition of both the middle class and our national independence. Tragedy by design. How did our nation arrive at this pass? Is our decline the result of irrepressible historical forces, or is their design at work? If the latter is true, who is responsible? And what do they want? And can they be stopped? The bad news is that America has been led to the brink of disaster by design. The good news is that those responsible for leading our nation to the precipice can be stopped because our nation plunges into the third world status. During the mid-20th century, Taylor Caldwell was one of the world's best-selling novelists, a careful student of history and current events. Caldwell used her novels to deplete, as in likely fictional form, the perennial struggle for human freedom and dignity, the chief enemy of which is the deeply entrenched international elite that seeks total power. In order for that elite to rule, Caldwell understood the middle class would have to be destroyed. The following chapters will examine briefly the barefoot handiwork of that international elites, the shackling of American business and socialist regulations which had driven much of our manufacturing abroad, which will be chapter 2. The rapidly unfolding plot to amalgamate our nation with other countries of the Western Hemisphere into a socialist regional government akin to the European Union, which is already going on. Creation of the framework for a centralized, managed global economy in which our economy fortunes, both individual and national, will be determined by unelected foreign businesses. Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Opening our borders to unrelenting flood of foreign immigrants, both legal and illegal, thereby undermining our national security, national independence, distinctive cultural heritage, and standard of living. Chapter 5. The escalating assault on traditional American moral standards and institutions. The entanglement of our nation in foreign conflicts, which is what we're messing with Ukraine. No war for Ukraine, folks. No war. Which are explicitly intended to advance the creation of a centralized political system directed by United Nations and a central directed global economy under the supervision of the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization. None of these developments just happen, folks. They don't happen by coincidence. None of the dire consequences that flowed therefrom can be considered unavoidable. The closing chapter, chapter 6, will describe how we can save our nation and create a better world for our children. But before examining a remedy, we must first survey the damage. So that's the conclusion of chapter 1 of the book, America's Engineered Decline. I appreciate you being here. This is a very important message to share with people because it's already happened. It's happening. This is the last stage, folks. There's massive inflation going to be up. Folks, within 6 months, I'm expecting that the dollar it's going to collapse tremendously. And so if you're buying anything, you're going to be paying 3 or 4 times if you can even get it. And these are necessities, folks. This is not frivolous things. It's not stuff that you got to, let me get a car, buy a computer, whatever. That's going to be over with, folks. You see. So thank you. If you have questions and more, we'd love to try to answer those questions. This is something I have wanted to do. This is the particular book I'm talking about. A very small book, but a good and concise book. A lot of statistics and information. And eventually, it's so important for people to understand what is going on. I believe that 90% of the people, maybe less, maybe 85%, but it's a high mark. Most people don't have any idea what's going on. They have no idea. And if I talk to younger people, many of them are working 2 to 3 jobs just to survive. And they're still getting government help because they're not making enough money to even support themselves. That's what's going on. And then there are people, what I would call, who are families, not families, but women or men, but mainly women who have children. And they're dependent upon the federal government for aid in any way they can get it. And so that makes it almost impossible. And you see how this is taking place. What a country was in the 60s and 70s was dramatically different than what it is today. You see. Because I'll share with you this. I worked in a restaurant. Yes, I lived at home. I was 17 or 18 years old. I made $2.50 an hour working in that restaurant. $2.50 that time was minimum wage, folks, here in South Carolina. And the key thing here is that gas didn't cost me a fortune, and I lived at home. But I could do whatever I wanted to. And then I eventually came back, went out of state, did something for a summer job, came back, and I was making, the guy told me, he says, I'll pay you $5 an hour. I says, no, I don't think so. I'm going to look somewhere else. And I went work the second shift, worked in a textile plant, worked full time, and went to college full time in the days. I don't know how I did it, but I did it. And that time period, I went to college, folks, local university here, and my full semester was a little over $500. I didn't live on campus. There was no such thing as that at that time. So it was $500 to $600 that I paid for each semester. So there are 2 semesters in the year. So I was getting education allowance $1,000 to $1,200 a year. And for 4 years, it's approximately, if you multiply, that's around $6,000. That's how good things were and stable back then. Even though books did cost a lot of money, that's what you bought. That's what cost the other part of the $100. But no one can remember those years because very few people now experience that. You see. So I see Jonathan. Good to see you, Jonathan. Yes, all planned. Yes, it is. Very much so. I've worked at different things and seen this all of my life. Eventually, like I said, I worked for my family's business later on. But the point simply is that everything has changed dramatically, and what's up the road here is not going to be a pretty picture for you folks. And they're talking about war, all this nonsense. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, never has been. And a warning was done with, I think, with Turkey. Basically, the governor of there, the leader of Turkey, has been what I would call a mixed kind of guy. He's been getting his weapons not only from the United States, but he's also been getting his weapons from Russia. I don't know if he's getting them from China. And that causes concern with NATO because they're a NATO country. But he's been able to do that for some time. But he basically may have overstepped his reins in some ways when he stated that he was not going to allow one of the countries in Scandinavia. I don't know if it's Sweden or Finland or Norway. Um, he was not going to give support to that. And basically, what that meant, so one vote is standing from that, means it doesn't get passed in the NATO nations. And again, the realization simply is Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So what the fuck are we doing? Are we going to we're going to continue following these policies? Or trying to think of his name right now, Zelensky, who wanted to basically surround Russia and basically force them to capitulate. But our military folks is a joke too. We're sending our military hardware to a foreign country that basically has no idea what to do with their weapons because, frankly, they're already defeated in many ways. And yet we're still sending it over there. And we have American troops on ground there, folks, just like we did in Vietnam. Even during the Kennedy administration, there were troops in Vietnam, what they call advisors, you see. That's how they start a war, you see. Gradually get involved in this and that. And they say, oh, we're going to make sure that you're, quote unquote, getting your arms and we're going to show you how to use them, such and such. Well, frankly, again, we don't need to be giving them those stuff at all. It's a quagmire. And we haven't won a war, folks, in a long, long time. The last time I remember we won a war was the last war was World War II. Since then, we have lost wars. We never won in Vietnam. We never won in Korea. Okay, and whatever else's places we've been, we've lost also. Or we've maybe gone into Iraq and other countries and destroyed their countries. But in reality, that's a different story. You see. So it's just important that you understand this information. If you live here in the United States or you live in Canada, this is a plan that's been going on. I remember sitting on my political science classes discussing this and arguing against other students that wanted world government then. And I'm looking at them, what are you talking about? What world are you, what planet are you on? If you think it's bad in Washington, why would we give all our quote unquote sovereignty to a place in Belgium? Why would we do that? Are we stupid or something? No, it's been planned this way. It's a way of destroying this country from within. It's a Trojan horse. So, my recommendation simply is for people out there, if you see this, you need to be you need to be doing everything you can do to make yourself self-sufficient. You need to have, farm animals. You need to have ways of actually having power in some ways, take care of your house in one way or the other. You need to be having food on top of food on top of food, folks. Because they're going to be times, as far as I see coming, they may come to your door and they will want to quote unquote give you a vaccine or whatever they want to try to force down your throat. You're going to have to say no. Are you going to, and you probably, when you say no, you're going to be marked off as a bad person because that's what they're going to do. I believe that this particular government itself, this may be, I'm not trying to be negative here, but I believe this is the last president we'll ever have. I believe it's going to morph into what I call there won't be any more governments you can elect anybody for. That sounds pretty negative, but I've never seen a country as I'm looking at right now capitulate and continue to capitulate as though everything's fine. The train's still on the track when the train is not even on the track, folks. The country is completely come apart because we have people who are enemies within our own government, you see. They didn't swear upon the Constitution. They swear on something else. And they are determined to destroy this country because they hate us. But a lot of it simply is their programming. They've been programming. You know, look at my Tavistock Institute deal when I share with Dr. John Coleman. This has all been planned. We're being used. In fact, I wonder if the United States is being used again in Tavistock Institute to get involved ourselves into the war in Ukraine. I wonder if that's what's going on, that we no longer have what I call autonomy to actually say no to these things. We've already bought into this. That is, presidents, representatives, whatever, are going to do these things because that's what they're going to do. And it's all motivated by power and money. So my suggestion simply is you need to be aware of these things and you need to be self-sufficient as best you can. It's not a very good sign. But we'll do with the next chapter here. Again, this is an excellent book, very short book, but comes to the point of how this country, you destroy. See, when you destroy, let me say one more thing. If you destroy the middle class, you destroy hope from the poor to move up. They will never move up because they don't have a chance anymore now, you see. That's what they've done. They destroyed that whole, see, that was the whole deal. And the rich could care less. They don't care. And I'm talking about rich. I'm talking about, people make millions and millions of dollars a year. They could care less. See, the middle class always gave encouragement even for the poor to move up if they desired that, either by education or whatever, being entrepreneurs, all that type of thing. And reality simply is there's no hope for middle class anymore because they've shut the doors. And if you're a white person, they also are not going to let that stand either, you see, because you're a bigot. You've been castralized, which is another, they do this, just do this type of thing. They blame somebody else. But in reality, you have to take responsibility for yourself in all walks of life and how you treat people and how you want to be treated, you see. So thank you for being here. Yes, Jonathan, you have a question here. It's going to get worse before it gets better. They're just getting started. Don't expect for things to get better until at least 2033. I don't know. That's a long time from now. You must be a lot younger than I am. But I was going to say simply, it doesn't look very hopeful, Jonathan, at all. I believe what's so sad about the whole thing is that people are completely oblivious of what's coming. But then the same thing happened when the Great Depression took place. But at that time, they could still work for food. And there wasn't massive inflation. And what's going to be occurring, but it's already starting, it's already massive inflation. And they're printing paper, and they're printing paper, and they're printing paper, and there's nothing behind it. And when people eventually see that, the eyes will be open. Suddenly their paper money has no value. And I don't know if we'll get as bad as Argentina. I know that Zimbabwe had what I would call the worst of all worlds, so to speak, and had a dictator also. And I don't know if that country's ever going to, and even if they've been used. The country used to be Rhodesia. Is considered probably one of the most mineral infested grounds. There's plenty of minerals there. So is South Africa, and yet its people suffer. You see. And most of the people who were white were ran off. Who were the farmers there in that country. In fact, I studied that in college. We studied Southern Africa. And at that time, Rhodesia was the breadbasket of all of Southern Africa, even more than South Africa. They did well, they produced well, the farmers there in Rhodesia. And then it became Zimbabwe, and it completely collapsed and destroyed all those farmers, you see. They were threatened with their lives. And they used hatred. They used it based upon race, and they destroyed their own country, you see. Thank you, Jonathan, for making some good observations. Wish you well. Thank you for being here. Thank you for everyone who's been here. Again, if you can, pass this information to others. I'd appreciate it. Thank you again, and have a good day.